So I think we can start as planned, and then we're going to add more people joining after they are able to. So hello, and thank you for joining us today. This is a fourth Wednesday we're together. For some of us, fourth Wednesday together. And I wish to thank you all for taking the time on Wednesday afternoon to be with us. Today, we have the final session of this training, capacity building training sessions, which is on ethics, safety, confidentiality, data collection and processing, and the consultant-client relationship in online environments. So we are mostly we're definitely going to talk only oriented towards those topics. And together we have sessions that will be chaired by Adrià Quesada, from IT consultant from Energy Control. And we will also have, in the second part of the sessions, we will have a group session, which will be divided in 3 different topics. We're going to have to make a breakout rooms, and you're going to be able to pick whichever breakout room you wish. We're going to make sure that we have balanced in between of the sessions. But first will be on data collection and processing procedures for a drug checking service that will be facilitated by Adrià and Mireia. A second one will be data collection and processing procedures in applied fieldwork research. So it will be on data collection when you're taking different information from your clients or beneficiaries or key target population. And the last but not least will be on right to privacy in the online spaces. So this will be in the final, in the second part of the training. Not to take too long from Adrià, because I know he has very important things to say to us. I'm going to give a word to him. And as usual, we're going to have first session until 5 o'clock. Then we're going to have half an hour break. And then we're going to dive into breakout rooms and sessions. And after which I think we're going to have a lovely discussion. Evaluation will be at the end. If you do have any questions, you can type them into chat. And yeah, I think this is it.
Thank you, Irena. So I will share my screen. Okay, I hope that everyone can see me and hear me well. My name is Adrià Quesada, as Irena said. I'm an IT consultant for energy control and other 100 action projects. And today we're gonna deep dive into data collection, processing, ethics, safety, and all of these different topics that we talk about when we deal with data in online environments. So to start, let's talk about a bit about digitalization. That is a concept that we all heard in the last years. And as we know, this is a process to improve manual systems, manual data workflows into something automated with the help of different tools. These tools are rapidly transforming the space that we work on, and we need to be updated about the new trends and what's going on, because it's a big field. So what does digitalization give to us as opportunities? For example, the first thing that you can take about digitalization is that you can reach bigger audiences, more people, different communities that were used to when you work on without these digital tools. Also, all of these tools and communication online can help us work more efficiently and to keep the data and be more efficient in our day-to-day services at work. Also, there are several studies that say that if you comply with GDPR and other data protection laws, the resilience of your organization or project increase, because GDPR is a very complex law that protects personal data from the individuals, but also gives a framework for the people and organizations to improve their operational procedures and have better workflows when dealing with complex data. But also at the same time, we have some threats when talking about digitalization. The first one is, as I said, GDPR and other data protection laws are very complex. If you read the document that explains the GDPR, it's more than 90 pages and in a language that is not easily understood by everyone. When the GDPR was being discussed and put into implementation, there was a big push in the sources, especially for companies, on how to comply with the GDPR. But there is a lack of support or guidance for civil society organizations and NGOs and all of these organizations that work in the third sector. Also, compliance with the GDPR can vary a bit depending on the country that you are working in. For example, there are very specific topics on the GDPR. One of them is the journalist definition that can vary between countries. So if you are an organization that develops your services or work in different countries in the European Union, can be a bit difficult sometimes to be updated and to know how to comply with the data protection laws. Also, sometimes we are forced to use some tools that do not comply 100% with the GDPR or other data protection laws. One of the big examples is Microsoft Office. They are still in litigation and discussion with the European Union on how to solve very specific parts of GDPR compliance. But at the same time, almost everyone uses Microsoft Office for developing documents, presentations, and other Office documents. So these are some of the threats that can make our work more difficult. But before diving into data protection laws and safety and ethics, let's talk about a bit some concepts that we all know about, but maybe it's better to define them so we have a common understanding. The first one is personal data. That's something that we all heard of, but personal data, it's any information that can identify a living individual. This definition is extracted from the GDPR document, and it's very important. Identifying means that any piece of information that alone or together with other data can identify a particular person in the world. Also, it's important that the definition of living. So it's someone that is currently living. If it's dead already, that is not personal data. Some examples of personal data: physiological aspect, genetic, mental, cultural aspects, social identity, IP address, names, surnames, cookies, ID, data location, advertising ID, so any type of information that can identify an individual. And this data is not limited to any particular format. It can be a video, audio, numerical, informal statistics, graphical, and also photographies. Inside the personal data, we have a special category that is called sensitive personal data. That needs a higher level of protection. This data, for example, can be genetic data, biometric, and also health. Inside this category, we can also find racial information, ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or ideological convictions, or maybe if they're affiliated to a union. Then we have aggregation and disaggregation. When we're talking about data, and aggregation is any process where we collect individual data, we gather it, and we summarize. For example, the number of users per month on a service can be an aggregated data. Then we have disaggregated data. That is when you take aggregated data and you break out this this collective data, this data that you have, into different dimensions or categories to have a more understanding on the detail level. This aggregated data can help identify who is being excluded or discriminated against. And this is very helpful when we are doing advocacy or when we want to know if certain populations or communities are being discriminated in that environment. This can help us facilitating a more equitable allocation of resources and assistance, and also supporting and monitoring other exclusion groups. Inside the disaggregation, we have the dimensions. The dimensions refers to the characteristics which data are disaggregated. For example, one of it is gender or origin. These characteristics need to be exhaustive and mutually exclusive. So with this level of detail, we can understand more about these communities. Then we have consent. Consent is a word that is being spoken in many different environments, but related to data protection, consent means offering individuals a real choice on something. It needs to be a genuine consent, and it needs to put the individuals in charge and build trust. That means giving all the information related to the data subjects and explaining them why we are collecting the data, how we are processing it, and what we are going to do with the data. The data subject, really needs to understand what we are doing and give explicitly consent so the consent can be valid. That's why since 2018, many websites, when you enter, you have like this cookie pop-up that gives you all the information, what they want to do, which partners are sharing the information, third parties, and so on. Most of these implementations are not GDPR compliant because they are very complex and they give you too much information at the same time. So you're not able to read all of it and give to-do concept. Then we have some concepts that we found on the GDPR. The first one is data subjects, and data subject is any living individual whose personal data is collected or held or processed. Then we have data controller, which is an organization that collects information about data subjects, whether they are in the EU or not. And finally, we have the data processor. That is an organization that processes personal data under the instruction of a controller. To put an example, if we have an organization like a charity that is collecting data about the donors or people that are interested in their work, these people that are interested is the data subject. The charity is the data controller because they control which information they are collecting. And the charity is contracting the service of an email provider. The email provider is the data processor to send a newsletter. So the data controller has the capability to contact the processor and tell it, hey, I'm giving you this data, and by law, you need to do this and this and this. That's the role of the data controller and data processor. If we read the document on the GDPR about what is processing data, processing is a very broad context, and they give you a long list of words that fall into that category. Collecting, recording, organizing, structuring, storing, and so on, and so on, and so on. So when you collect data or you do anything with it, that means processing. So why we should care about data? Why is so important, and why the GDPR is so complex and everyone is so interested in it? With a proper data workflow and proper practices, we can gather a lot of insightful information and conclusions on the work we are doing or the effects on the community. And that is very important for doing advocacy and to explain to other people what's going on. Also for fundraising and budgeting, it's very important to have proper data and a proper analysis to understand where the money is coming from and what we are doing with it. Also, if we work in policymaking or drafting documents for policymakers, evidence-based information is very important and gives a lot of advantage for writing properly documents. Also for monitoring, if we have a proper monitoring structure and proper monitor collected data, we can do analysis based on the time and see the trends. And finally, but also very important, is to ensure equality on different communities or different groups of population. But when we are working with data, there are some ethical topics that we need to consider. And one of it is the algorithmic decision-making bias. And what is this? To give an example, when the freelancers are working for Uber and Uber is directing who is getting which job and when and so, that is an algorithmic decision-making process. And currently it's still in trial, but it has been discovered that this algorithmic decision has some bias. This bias comes from many different things, but on the Uber case, it's from the workers that are not putting enough hours from the Uber perspective. Also, this algorithmic decision bias, we can find them on healthcare. For example, since many years ago, male bodies have been the standard for medical testing in healthcare. So when dealing with other genders, maybe the information is not enough to give proper treatment. Also in voice recognition systems, usually they perform worse for women and non-binary individuals. That's because the data is only collected for males. When we disaggregate the data, it's also very important to raise concerns about personal privacy and protection, like personal data privacy. Because if we don't collect properly these dimensions when we are collecting data, then we cannot give proper conclusions when talking about very specific dimensions like racial origin, ethnic origin, or gender. And finally, if we don't properly analyze the data, we can take the wrong conclusions or don't give enough context when disseminating the information, and that can really harm individuals or other communities. And about the safety, there are some topics that are very common when you deal in data in a company or organization, and one of it is data breaches. It's when some sort of personal data gets breached into the internet, the public, or other sources. This can happen by a malicious actor, like a hacker, like someone that gets into the IT systems of the organizations and steals this data. But also it can happen like an accident. Because if you travel with your work laptop and you have personal information there and your laptop gets lost or stolen, that is also considered a data breach. And by data protection law, you need to notify the authorities within 72 hours when this happens. Depending on the severity of the breach, different actions need to take place, and one of them is informing the data subjects that their data has been breached. Also, we can find hate speech in a lot of online communities, forums, and so on, and moderating these spaces and controlling hate speech is very difficult. So about the GDPR, that is the main topic. The main goal of the GDPR is protecting personal data regardless of the technology used for collecting or storing it. GDPR applies to technology, but also to organizational procedures and also on paper, if you have it there. It was approved in 2016 and applied from 2018 and so on. And currently is the most close and detailed data protection law in the world, where many derive from it. So the GDPR affects many organizations, many NGOs, everyone that works with personal data, and it limits how these organizations can collect, store, access, use, or share personal data. And also give data subjects the rights towards their personal data and how it's used. The core of GDPR is 7 principles. The first one is lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. So for data processing to be lawful, it must be based on a legal basis. There are 6 legal bases stipulated on GDPR. We will enter them later on. Also, the data processing can be unfair if it has an unjustifiable negative impact on the data subject. Sometimes the negative impact is unavoidable, but if you cannot justify it, then it's not fair. Also, it's very important the transparency. You need to really explain to the data subjects what are you doing, what are you collecting, and what are your procedures towards the storing and processing of this data. And they really need to understand it properly. The second principle is the limitation of purpose. So the data that you collect, it needs to have a very, very specific and explicit and legitimate purpose, and you cannot process it with other purpose in a manner that is incompatible with what was accepted. Also, if it affects the human right of the person or the data subjects, then you cannot comply. Also, if you need to archive data that is in the public interest, scientific interest, or historical research, that is compatible with the original purpose that you communicated with the data subject. Then we have data minimization, and this is just collect what you really need and nothing else. I know that when we are developing a survey, we are tempted to put as much questions as we want, but we really need to have a purpose for each data that we collect, because maybe we don't need the name of the person and we can just give an identifier. And this data minimization principle needs to be applied not only on the collecting, also needs to be applied on the storage or on the archiving purposes. So if you're collecting data and want to store it for doing a revision later on, maybe you don't need to store all of it, just the aggregated part, that's enough. Then we have accuracy, and accuracy is to have accurate data. This data needs to be kept up to date, depending on which type of data it is. Then we have the limitation of storage. And this means that you may only keep this personal data as long as you need for the specified purpose. The retention periods for the data that you control needs to be established and communicated to the data subject, and also documented for the rest of the people in the organization. And periodically, you need to review the data procedures that you have, and maybe you need to anonymize the identifiers if you really don't need them anymore. Then we have integrity and confidentiality, and this is adopting appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect the personal data that you're storing. And this needs to be done in a risk-based approach. What this means that you need to assess the level of risk for each operational procedure that you have and get to work on the one that is you have more risk. Also, it's very important to have protection over unauthorized access on the personal data that you are storing. And final, but also very important, is the accountability. It's to proper document the measures, protocols, or even the people that is collecting and storing and doing any kind of processing with the data that you hold. This documentation is very important if you have a data breach or an authority or the EU contacts you about some aspect of your work. So if you really document what are you doing and what are your processes, accountability is checked. So what are the best practices to try to comply with the GDPR? Because compliance with the GDPR, it's not something that you do one time and then it's done. No, compliance is an ongoing process. It never ends, and you always need to be updated about what are the best practices. The first one is authorizing someone in your organization to ensure compliance. For a really big organization, that means more than 250 people, if I remember correctly, it needs to be a specific person with specific job that is a data protection officer, DPO. But for a small organization, for example, an organization that have 3 workers and 10 volunteers, this is not feasible. So the best option is maybe assembling a team, so the responsibility doesn't fall onto an individual. A team that reviews periodically what we are doing with the data, how we are collecting it, and the different procedures. This reviewing process needs to happen periodically because, as I said, this law can change. Also, it's very important to create a toolkit with different steps on what to do with each situation. For example, what you should do if a data breach happens, what you should do if a data subject requests access to your data. Having this toolkit, this guidance, this document can really help so everyone in the organization is on the same page. Next one is knowing which data you hold. And for doing this, the best way is doing a data inventory. So you can sit down with your team and review what data you currently possess and what are the purpose of it. For example, for doing an inventory, you can have a Word document, an Excel document. It doesn't matter. It needs to be some kind of document to store this information. And you need to have which type of data you are processing or collecting, the legal basis for each processing operation, the purpose for each operation, also who has access to that data, the time that you keep this data until it's deleted, also how you process it, if you transfer this data to other organizations, and which level of security, IT security, organizational security, do you have in place for each processing operation. And then we go to assessing the risk level. On the previous data law that we have in the European Union, that was, I think it started in 1995, it was a checklist-based data protection law. That means that you have like a checklist list that you were going item by item, assessing if you were complying with it. But with GDPR, it's a little bit different because organizations are responsible in deciding which measures they need to apply to comply with the data protection law. That's why it's so important having a document with all the procedures that you have. because then you can assess the risk level of each operation. There is a very specific phrase that is commented a lot in the data protection world, that is say what you do and do what you say. So be very clear in which data you are collecting and do what you are saying, because otherwise you will need to explain this very carefully to a regulator or a government. Finally, when you know the risk level of each operation that you are doing, you can start prioritizing the compliance on each step. For example, when budgeting IT from different tools, you can use this risk level assessment to know how much budget you can allocate on each operation based on the data. As I said, it's very important to have a legal basis. We will get into detail on the next slide. And always process the data that you really need. Don't collect more data because you are collecting. Keeping the data secure related to IT, and also with proper organization procedures. And if you have data transfer to organizations, make sure that you have an agreement in place and the data subjects are notified. So there are 6 legal bases when working with data protection law, the GDPR. These 6 legal bases are explained in the document, but we will go briefly over each of one. First one is consent. We really know consent when you go into a website and they ask you, do you accept going here because we're doing this and this and this? This is a policy, a cookie policy, and they're asking you for the consent. And sometimes, depending on the operation, you need to give explicit consent for each of the processing operation. So the consent is only valid when the subject freely gives the consent to you. This legal basis can be invalid if there is a power imbalance. What I mean by that, like if an individual is working in an organization and their boss is asking for specific personal data about this worker, the worker maybe it's not free to decide if they want to give this personal information or not, because their employment depends on their boss to be happy. Then we have the performance of a contract. That means if you have a contract with an organization and an individual, you have a legal basis to collect the data stipulated on that contract. Then we go to the legal obligation, and this only happens in some specific contexts. For example, for tax purposes or for legal obligations. Also, if you need to collect information when dealing with budgeting of money for money laundering purposes or terrorist financing regulations, this falls into the compliance with the legal obligation. Next one is vital interest, and this only can happen if the life of the individual depends on it. If the individual or data subject is incapable of giving consent, maybe you can apply this vital interest legal basis. But you really need to be sure that that's the only option to properly give a service, because if you can do it in a less inclusive way, then this legal basis is invalid. And also for healthcare or other special category of data, vital interest legal basis is tricky to apply. Next one is public interest, and this is also difficult to apply because it's collected in a document that says what are the public interests. Maybe you can say that the work that you do within your organization has a public interest, but this needs to be approved by the government. Next one is very used for NGOs, that is legitimate interest. For example, if you are doing public advocacy and you want to reach a policymaker, you can find the contact information and contact him directly, because it's in the interest of the organization to contact this policymaker to do some advocacy. This can be applied except if it gets into conflict with the human rights of the individual, especially if the individual is a child. If you're doing research or documentation, public interest or journalists, that is a subsection of public interest, is quite complex to prove, because the definition of journalist varies depending on the country you are doing the service. The most used for research and documentation purposes is legitimate interest. And also, it's very important when you're doing research that you have data policy and you explain to the data subjects exactly what are you doing, and give them plenty of time to decide and properly give you consent. Another very tricky aspect is when you're working with open source data. Open source data is data that is public to access, but not to use. One of the examples is social media information. When users have a public profile and they post their opinions, their photos, and so, you need to be very careful if you collect this information and you process in any way, because when you collect this information and aggregate it, you become a controller of this data. And depending on what is on the social media post, that can be considered personal data, and you need to have proper resources and proper procedures to comply with the law. So if you are using social media to collect information, be very careful about these legal bases. Another one is advocacy. As I said, if you reach out any public official or other stakeholders without their permission, you can do that if it falls in the category of legitimate interest. But engagement with your subscribers or supporters, or you have a newsletter, this doesn't fall into legitimate interest. You need to have their consent to send them promotional emails or newsletter information and so on. And finally, I'm going to give you some examples of different policies that you can have or you can implement. It's not mandatory to have all of these policies, some of them are, but it's a recommendation that can help you achieve better procedures when working with personal data. First one is a privacy policy and needs to be public and accessible. That means a website, or maybe if you have headquarters or a place, like a document that anyone can check it. And it needs to really specify the types of data that you're working with and your procedures. Then you have overarching data protection policy that mainly this is an internal policy that states the different procedures that your team and your organization are working and dealing with. Here you can really specify what happens if you have a data breach, what happens if you want to do a new survey. So all of these procedures, collect them into a policy. Another one is the cookie policy that we all know about. When you enter a website that use cookies to track, then you need to have a policy stating why you are collecting this data, which type of data you are collecting, and what are you going to do with it, and when you're going to delete it. If you have a mailing list, like a newsletter of subscribers, you also need to have a policy on what you do with the data. But the specific case is that if you had a newsletter or mailing list before the GDPR was started with a number of subscribers, you didn't have to send them an email again to ask for the consent. The consent started in 2018, so for new users that were subscribing to your mailing list, then you need to have the consent form. Another policy that you can have is the data sharing. It's when you are sharing personal information with other organizations or other partners of your job. And then you need to really write down what are the different agreements and what's going to happen with the procedures. Finally, the data breach policy can be separated or can be inside the overarching policy is how to deal with data breaches. Because data breaches, they will happen. It's not if yes or no, it's when. Because IT systems are very complex and at any given point of the time, the data can be filtered to the public. So if you have a procedure or protocol in place on how to deal with these situations, it can really help to mitigate the harm done. As I said, it's very important that if you have a data breach, to notify in 72 hours. Otherwise, the fines can get very big. So my presentation was until here. I don't know if anyone has any questions about this topic.
Yes, thank you, Adrià. We have a question in the chat, and that question is, what do you do to save stolen data?
To what?
What do you do to save stolen data?
Like you mean to save data that was stolen
Yeah,
and
yeah. So data, I assume, Elaine, did we understood your question correctly? If data gets stolen, what do we do to save the data, right? I think this was
like your data. Okay. There are different procedures on what happens when your data gets stolen. And this depends on the level of importance of this data. It's not the same that your biometric data gets stolen, that your name and surname. Because depending on the level, there are some risk factors and different procedures that you need to comply. It's a very tricky question because the GDPR document is very complex and interpreting it, like you need to be a legal expert. There are some organizations that give you advice on what to do if your data gets stolen, but it really depends on the context and which type of data.
okay. So does anybody else has any questions related to what Adrià just presented us? Or do you want to share, do you have any procedures to navigate all this space in your organization if you do collect any data? Yes, Lila?
Yes, thank you, Andrea, for a very interesting presentation. I really have quite a few questions for you, but I'll go for the first two. You said at a certain point that Microsoft Office, the package Microsoft Office is not compliant to GDPR, but I did not understand the reasons, and I'd like to learn more. And also, you said that there is some negative impact connected to data collection of data, which is unavoidable. And I did not understand what is the negative impact, and I would like to know more.
Yeah, so about the Microsoft Office, this is related to Office 365, I think it's called. It's the version that is online. So depends on which license do you have within your organization. The data in this Office platform, online Office platform, can sometimes go to the US servers. So you need to have a specific license for EU compliant, but at the same time, they discovered that in some cases it's not compliant 100%. But this is a legal battle between EU and Microsoft. And still, for what I can say is that you can use Office in your computer and just make sure that you have a password on your computer, or maybe if it's an Excel with personal information, has a password protected Excel. And don't worry if Office is compliant or not, because most of the governments, they work with Office. So if they find it not compliable, we really have a big problem in all the aspects of life. And about potential harms of data, that was related to disaggregation. And for example, if you are working with migrants, or you are working with some sort of population and you want to publish some conclusions, even that your work has a purpose to improve their situation and to inform policymakers, maybe another actor can use this information for doing harm. For example, a credit agency can use published data about in which geographic area there are migrants to apply some sort of discrimination when giving credit to them. And also this is related to children, because sometimes we don't collect all the information about the migrants and their families, and you really need to be careful on how you store this information and how you publish it, so they get no harm from bad actors.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Adrià. I mean, from my experience, can say that the research part and data collection part, when we did it in paper, was in some cases much easier, because I mean we had a compliant to keep the records separately and code everything, so it was much easier, I guess, than now when everything mostly is in digital space and we need to take care. And in most of the cases, we don't even know what is saved online or not. I mean, when we're talking about users and when we're talking about users of our services and beneficiaries, I think we all need to sit down and think twice how we provide services online and what is left behind all those interactions we have with the community and with people who are navigating in our space, in the digital spaces with us, to be sure that we are giving information based on which they can decide if they do want to have a service online or not, and how much privacy we can guarantee or not. So this is something I think it will be even more relevant as we go into the future. So I think it was very, very beneficial to hear this presentation, to get an overview on how big and important and wide this space is, and like what are the things to take into account. So we still have some time before the break, and I would like to give you some more space to ask any questions you have. Yeah, Georg.
Yeah, well, once again, super interesting. A question, do you have examples also where things really went wrong in the NGO sector, just to make it more visible? Or
I have some documents with several examples, but just now that I can remember, not exactly. One that I remember is when the GDPR was in effect. Like most of NGOs were sending emails to their subscribers like, hey, do you consent to this? And that was not necessary. Business were not doing it. And I know that I have saved somewhere a case of an NGO that was working with migrants, where the data was breached by a malicious actor. And I think the NGO had to use the budget for like 3 or 4 years at this moment to solve this legal problem, because they didn't have any procedures, they didn't have any documents stating what are they doing and how they're doing it. So it was very difficult legal battle. That's what I say, the best thing is prevention. Write down what are you doing.
No, I mean there's a big difference also between the very small organizations and the bigger ones. I mean, if you have an NGO with, well, let's say 50 people, then of course you have someone who can really also dive into it and be expert. But the smaller ones, it's really a challenge also then to be careful, and so that's why also this is super important to have this information.
And many times, if you look on the internet about conducting the service of a data protection officer or to someone to assist you in compliance with the GDPR, most of the services are focused on business or for-profit organizations, not for the third sector or other type of organizations.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a very stupid question, but how do you realize that you had a breach of data? Are you informed by somebody? How do you get to know it?
It depends on how do you store the data. For example, if you're storing the data on paper, you will know if you have a breach, if the door is open when you enter the morning the next day and something is missing. But when dealing with IT systems, it's important to try to apply some sort of monitoring service. So this service that you contract can tell you if you have a data breach or unauthorized access. Is a very tricky world, especially on the IT part, because you can monitor many things in many different levels, and everything has a cost. So you really need to decide how much budget do you want to put in these monitoring activities to know that you have a data breach? Because if you have a data breach and you don't know it, and like the government or authority realize that you had a data breach and you didn't notify it because you don't know, you have a big problem, a really big legal problem. So try to assess the risk level for each operation that you do and apply the according budget to it. Because it's very difficult to monitor all the internet to see if your data is there. There are some services for it, but the best thing is prevention.
Thank you.
I mean, Adrià, now when you said it, does it make a difference if you're storing? I mean, I guess that it makes a big difference if you're storing your data online or offline. And I guess that offline can be safer in some way if it's not stored on the computers you're working every day. So data is stored on the segregated external hard drives and stuff like that. And like, what's the difference? Like, would your advice would be to, I mean, do some kind of backup onto external drives, the data you don't use every day, for example, or something like that, and not store the data in the online clouds or something?
It really depends on which type of data it is and your knowledge and skills. For a lot of organizations, maybe the management is more than 30, 40, 50 years old. So the IT concepts can get a little bit tricky, but having the data on paper inside a safe, this is very difficult to breach. But when dealing with IT, try to understand which tools you are using, what are the capabilities of each tool, and also your day-to-day operations. So if you have some sort of very personal data, but you only access it once a year to do some sort of report or monitoring, maybe the best way is storing it in a hard drive and putting this hard drive in a drawer with a key, instead of the drive of the organization or the shared network, whatever, they're in a folder where everyone can access it. Some IT systems, they give you like permission, access, and control. So you can say this user can access this folder and so, but it really depends on your budget, your organization capabilities, and your skills.
Oh, thanks. So let me see the group. So if you all agree and you're ready now, we can go for a half an hour break. After which we're going to go into separate sessions. So I'm going to make breakout rooms right before
Is it
we're
possible
back.
for one more? Sorry.
Tell me.
Is it
Adrià,
possible for
I guess yes.
one more question now?
Sure.
My name is Oksana Buzovic. I'm from Moldova, NGO, Union for Equity and Health. I have I don't know, maybe it's also a strange question. It's about the exchange of data between organization or structure. Lately, we started to work together with the state, and they are imposing a common data collection, and it's important for us to take in consideration the confidentiality and the anonymity of the data we are collecting, but they want to have it very open. So for me, it's very important now to understand how do you work if you have such situation, and how you are proceeding. Maybe you have some procedures on that also. Thank you.
I know some ways to deal with this situation, but I think the working group with ReGeneration, Irena and Nina, know a little bit more on how to deal with this exactly, because how Serbian works. But I can say that sometimes you can share personal data, taking out the names, for example, you can use identifiers. You can try to anonymize the data so they don't have all of the personal details to identify the individual. But I'm not versed in Moldovan law, so I don't know if what the government is asking is within the law.
Yeah, so maybe I can answer also to what Adrià said. Yeah, we in ReGeneration used to have also requests from the government, especially working in the HIV sector, to also shared general data we have and collect different information of our users and our services. But yes, as Adrià said, we try to anonymize as much as possible the data, that as we share the data, it is completely, it is as safe as possible. It depends what exactly they're asking from you and in which way you are collecting the data as well. So for example, Nina is going to tell that in the working group. She's going to speak on the topic of data collection for the community research that we're doing. So basically what we did is to evaluate the online data collection tools who are giving us the most value for money, meaning that it allows us to, for example, navigate to delete the IP addresses or not to collect IP addresses, for example, because this is what usually can be breached, and then your users or beneficiaries could be tracked. So this is why we are opting not to do, for example, Google forms, because we don't know where the data is and what they're collecting, and they're collecting a lot behind in the back doors. But we use paid tools for data collection that is GDPR compliant, and that is, even though we're in Serbia, but it's important for us that is GDPR compliant because we're also operating in Europe. And these are the certain ways that you can, and that we're not collecting IP addresses, or we're completely anonymized data that we then deliver in numbers or in codes to the government if they're asking it. But I also know for the cases that police and different government structures in Eastern Europe and also in Southeast Europe used to ask for personal data of users. And I know for some organizations who lost their funding due to not comply, like due to not sharing those data. So not sure about what Moldovan state is asking from you, but maybe we can discuss that also after the group sessions if you think that's okay with you. I don't know how in detail we can help you at this point, but we'll be happy to look for the answers for you as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let's break out to, let's go to our deserved break. I guess it's okay to come back at 5:35. Are we okay with that? 17:35. And then I'm going to make a breakout room, and you're going to be able to pick breakout room with the topic of your choice. And we can go from there. It will be half an hour presentation, and then we'll have 15 minutes discussion, and then we'll have evaluation, questions and answers, and this will be it.
Thank you. See you in a bit.
See you in a bit.
See you in a bit. In energy control, when collecting data, when we're doing the drop-in center or outreach, also a little bit the process that we have for analyzing this data, because mainly we're using custom tools built by the IT team. We have very specific needs, and none of the tools that were online or services could fit our work. So we have developed our own tools. And also we have commented about the uses of the data that we have, especially on the research part, dissemination, advocacy, different materials that we publish on the web, and also services to the users, like our pill table that we have on our website, that everyone can check there if we have analyzed a pill and the track checking result.
Okay.
So if you want to comment a little bit what you have done.
Okay. May I now? Yes. So in group 2, we talked about data collection processing procedures in applied research, fieldwork research. So we actually talked about the use of platforms and how to ensure data protection. We compared, let's say, maybe the most often used or like the most available platforms, and we talked about our organization's process of choosing this platform. We chose Zoho survey for our organization's work, so we just showed like 5 minutes of how it works to create to create a survey in this platform. And but mostly we talked about GDPR compliance and about making sure that that actually we choose the platform that we are going to use for digital data collection, and maybe how to choose, what are some of the obstacles, what to how to balance between your resources, because many of these options, as Irena mentioned earlier, you have to pay for, which is something that you have to take into account. But also you have to take data safety and protection into account. So our topic was mostly about balancing and trying to find the best option for this.
Thank you. Very interesting topic, really, and how you assess the different tools to comply with the data protection laws, but also to not spend all your budget on a tool. Okay, Alexei, do you want to comment a little bit about your group?
Yes, thank you. Our clients and ourselves in the online spaces, and our group was divided into those who already have some experience or some extensive experience with online tools, and the other half of the group just wanted to find out more about the specifics of this work, because they see value in such a work, especially due to the fact that drug trends are changing and their clients' behaviors are changing. That's why they would like to engage more in such work. And also we talked about how even these GDPR rules, sometimes influence our privacy matters and our own behavior in the online spaces. For example, on Grindr, online outreach workers can't be proactive due to this laws. They have to wait until people really contact you, and it actually can influence your communication with these clients because you, on the one hand, you are present on this platform, but on the other hand, you can't like reach out to people, and you should wait until they reach out to you. So it's an interesting way of doing things. And also, when it comes to using some applications or tools for helping people with example, we can talk about data. We can gather just age and some other personal data, and it could actually also influence our interactions with the client. And also, we talked about how interesting it is in terms of age, because, for example, we can engage with our clients and then find out that they are 18 years old, for example. And of course, here we are like in a sort of a gray zone, because we won't ask them to, I don't know, produce their IDs or something. But if these clients would like to become, our in-person beneficiaries, then it could prevent, then their age could prevent them from doing so, because these rules would come into place. So yeah, it's an interesting topic, and it seems like during these sessions we have touched a lot of very interesting subjects, and our group has noticed that it would be great to learn more about and about different regulations on our online work. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexei. As you commented, this is a very interesting topic that influences our work a lot. And I think that is part of our mission as a community to share our practices and how we deal with specific situations. Because I said earlier, there's no many informations tailored for NGOs or civil sector organizations. So I think we should get together as a community, and especially in this type of spaces that we are right now, and share our practices and our teams with other organizations so we can improve together. Because GDPR compliance and data protection compliance is a very complex and costly measure. You need a lot of human resources, you need a lot of budget to properly comply with these laws. So yeah, and also as you said, it influences the way that we work, that you need to wait for the client or users to contact you instead of doing outreach, because this is what privacy is stated on the GDPR. So yeah, thank you again. I don't know if anyone has other questions or topics that they want to comment. We are quite on time, right, Irena?
Yeah, we are perfectly on time, so we have time for questions. Before I link you the evaluation form in the chat. So yeah, Georg?
Yeah, now that we are at it, how does it work with Zoom communications, for instance? Can you collect the participants? Can you work with that? Does that need special attention? And with data that you collect somewhere, you store, that I can understand, but you also have online real time data that you collect. Is that clear, the question?
Adrià.
If ReGeneration wants to comment something, because I know you did some research on how to use Zoom, especially on the privacy part.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask Nina to share the evaluation form, or I'm going to do it because I can't do two things in the same time. Yeah, so Zoom was compliant with GDPR, even though that was not specifically the case. This is why, for example, we're sending we're sending registration forms. So you're compliant and I suppose you read what you are giving rights for us. The idea with the Zoom, for example, with the recordings is to be as safe as possible is to record data on your computer, not on the Zoom cloud, which in instance should be GDPR compliant, but now with the changes with the AI companion, I don't know if you realize that Zoom changed a lot in the recent times. So if you're adding the AI companion, you're giving to Zoom all of your data and everything that is processed here for the improvement. So in that sense, we had the discussions, should we or should we not continue doing our consultations on Zoom. So for example, I'm going to do it, don't worry. So for example, we're not, how to say, turning on the AI companion when we're doing, ReGeneration doesn't do AI on Zoom anyhow, because we're not sure which type of data specifically. I know that they're not collecting IP addresses, for example, because we're using the number codes. So people are entering via number, not via their registration link or email. So in that sense, we're also making them more private if they don't want to, even say their name or show on the screen. So with this all new AI things, I think people should be very careful in the way that registration should be always made available for people so they can read terms and conditions and registering, and then they receive a feedback, and then you can navigate through that. So all of the AI new tools, I think for me, it's scarier in a way that we need to make much more attention and to spend much more time actually going through all of the terms and regulations in order to be sure that we're saying to people, yes, your data will be safe with us, or your name, IP address, or whatever else is safe with us. So in that sense, things are changing even for us in the very short time. So this will
It's
be
what you said in the beginning also, that
Yeah.
it changes so quickly, and it's always.
And I don't know, for example, you remember when we had the tools, when we had the changes in the WhatsApp, for example. So we previously had our organizational group in WhatsApp. And then when they changed terms and conditions, we had the discussion and we needed to vote, should we move our community group into Signal or Telegram? And then we had to lay out all of the terms and conditions for everybody in the community group. And then we voted. What do we feel it's safer for us to discuss certain things? So in that sense, I think it should be matter of organizational discussion and also community involved, if community is involved in those things, because we are community organizations. For us was important to have.
Yeah, and we realize how dependent we became of all these systems. I mean, to drop out of WhatsApp is so difficult if you work in different working environments, and that is the channel where you have the groups, etc. It's a challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
But this session really also showed them the challenges that we have then in terms of confidentiality, safety, etc.
I can say it, especially about Zoom or other like these big global services platforms like Google Drive or Microsoft, that the free accounts are not GDPR compliant because the data can go to any data center, maybe into the US or Asia. But usually the paid accounts, you can select which region you are, for example, EU, and they are mostly GDPR compliance. But again, you need to read the terms and service very carefully, and also when that update happens.
Yeah, also with the new EU regulations, we are now moving from Microsoft's or Office 365 to Zoho platform,
Yeah.
like gradually. not in like one big step because it's like too much change for all the colleagues also to learn like new skills, but like gradually app by app we move to the new platform because they have their servers also in Europe.
Yeah, so this is why we picked Zoho survey for our platform to do data collection, because we value and cost effectiveness, and what we needed it for was for us important, and also they're compliant with GDPR, which was important for us as well. And yeah, Zoho platform is something that I used prior to Microsoft 365. So, and yeah, it is much improved than in 2015 when I used it first. So I think that also, yeah, people are moving from tools that are has servers in US or places that are like Europe, to be concrete. Okay, so I have shared the evaluation form in the chat, but also we do have time for a couple of questions if somebody wants to ask something or comment on something.
If I can, if no one has a question right now, if I can just add two things to what you said and Adrià. So first of all, when it comes to GDPR compliance, I think it's also important to note that sometimes you have to really dive in to see if they really are GDPR compliant, because some, for example, I have seen people say that Google is GDPR compliant, and they have been fined multiple times for, in fact, not complying, to GDPR regulations. So I'm just saying that the fact that maybe a tool or a platform just says we are GDPR compliant does not mean that they in fact are, And just another thing that I wanted to note regarding what we were talking about, and particularly what Georg asked about Zoom. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Georg. But also, yes, one other thing to remember is that some of the ways in which we can make, data collection safer, or the platforms safer or more private or more anonymous, in fact, are not the default settings. So sometimes the way you set up, a research effort or a service really matters a lot. Sometimes there is a way to make it more anonymous or more private, but you have to choose this setting, So that's why you have to know the platform or the tool really well, so that you know what you have to choose. You have to create this, setting. It doesn't just come built in with the tool, if you understand. Yeah. So that was all. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Irena. Like, I think you have a lot of knowledge when you did your research on which platforms and tools to use. And this is very important for an organization to have someone or a team that really takes this seriously and deep dives into what procedures and tools they are using. Because if, as you said, if a tool says that they are GDPR compliant, don't trust it. Like, really check it properly, because you will get a fine otherwise.
Okay.
And that the fine is for the organization, and these are not low fines that can destroy an organization such as ours. I mean, that is super big. I think that we should close if we have something like this.
Georg, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, but only if there are no other questions. So maybe if you can say a little bit about the next steps, where will we find the presentations, etc. That will be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. So this is the end of the training sessions, and we are going to move to mentoring sessions, or agreeing on the mentoring sessions for the organizations who received a mentoring. That will be from June this year to June next year. And we're going to get in touch with everybody that previously applied for it or communicated with us with it. So there are several organizations already in discussion, but I think we're going to open space for a couple more. We are going to send you evaluation form and recording from the 4th session in the next email you will receive from us, and expect to have presentations in the form of manual. So we're going to transform all of the presentations in a form of a manual that will have also QR codes with the recordings and also tips for improving the work of your organizations, capacity building. So you will be guided as these sessions were formed. The manual will be formed in a similar way. So it will be, how to say, a guideline for improving certain ways of your operation in digital spaces. And it can be very similar, I mean, very simple things to a little bit more complicated things, but it will comply with all of the resources that we shared here, also links, also videos, very different examples, different programs or tools you can use. So the manual is expected to be done, I hope, by June, because all of this knowledge needs to be edited and formulated in one comprehensive tool, let's say, again, tool. So bear with us, and I think that is going to be sent to all of the registered emails we had in the Zoom. For the certificates, we're going to let you know, but I guess that in next month, we're going to be able to do certificates also in coordination with the coordination of the project, and also be sure that you're going to be contacted based on the registration contacts and also evaluation form, I guess, that we have in the system. So I guess I think that's it for now. Yeah, I mean, videos will be available at the YouTube link. Already I have sent here in the chat correlation YouTube, and this will be added also there. But in the meantime, you can watch the videos. And if you do have any questions or do have any concerns or do want to ask about the mentorship still, my email is in every email that is sent with the agenda. So you can directly contact me, or you can contact, you can go through the Boost project, and maybe there is a contact link there. But yeah, you can send any email or request in concerns to digital tools training or mentorship to me, and then we're going to agree on future steps, I guess. Is there any question, technical question related to it, or there is thank you. Good. Thank you once again for being with us for this 4 weeks. And yeah, I hope that we covered topics of your interest and that we see each other very soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ole.
And everybody was there.